were told Filipino history began with Spain, right? Wrong. Long before Magellan discovered anything, before kingdoms, before even the word Filipino existed, there were people here. Real people. Hunters, artists, survivors. Their skulls were buried deep in Palawan, untouched for 47,000 years, until one discovery flipped everything we thought we knew. The Tabon Man. But here's what no one tells you. This isn't just archaeology, it's identity theft. Generations erased from your history books. So today we're digging them back up. Not just the bones, but the truth about who the original Filipinos really were. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments, and I will give you a heart. Picture this, it's 1962. The air in Palawan is thick with humidity and mystery. Deep inside a limestone cave, a group of archaeologists led by Dr. Robert Fox wipes sweat from their brows as they dig through layers of earth. Years, decades, millennia stacked on top of each other. And then a skull fragment surfaces. Small, fragile, but older than anyone imagined. When they tested it, the results stunned the world. 47,000 years old. That's not a typo, 47,000. To put that in perspective, this skull existed before the pyramids, before rice cultivation, before the Philippines even had a name. This wasn't just an artifact. It was a time bomb in history that exploded the lie we'd all been taught, that our story began with Spanish colonization. Here's where it gets personal. Every Filipino grew up memorizing 1521 like it was a birthday. Magellan, Lapu-Lapu, the galleons, the cross, the conquest. But no one told you about the people who came before. The ones who hunted, loved, laughed, and raised families under the same stars you see today. They weren't nameless primitives, they were the first Felipes, the forgotten ancestors who walked the islands tens of thousands of years before the Spanish even built their ships. Now imagine this scene again. Robert Fox, an American anthropologist working for the National Museum of the Philippines, brushes off the soil from a bone and realizes what he's holding. A fragment of a human forehead, pieces of a jaw, and a few teeth. At first glance, nothing special, but when tested, it defied everything we thought we knew about Southeast Asia. The sample was 47,000 years old, making it one of the oldest human remains ever discovered in the region. That skull, later named Tabon Man, didn't just rewrite Philippine history, it redefined human migration in Asia. But here's where the real story begins, and it's not in the textbooks. See, the people who lived in those caves weren't lost wanderers. They were organized, skilled, human. They used fire, crafted tools, buried their dead with care, and even made ornaments from shells and teeth. Imagine that. People living in harmony with nature 45,000 years before we had politics, borders, or colonizers dictating who mattered. But let's talk about the insult, because it is an insult that most Filipinos never even heard about this. While other nations celebrate their ancient civilizations, we were taught to start our story with our colonizers. It's like being told your family didn't exist before your oppressor arrived. That's not history, that's erasure. Now here's what most people don't realize. Tabon Man wasn't alone. The Tabon caves in Palawan are part of a massive complex. Over 200 interconnected caves. It wasn't just a burial site. It was a community. Evidence of fire, cooking, tools, and repeated habitation shows that families lived there for thousands of years. They hunted deer, wild pigs, even rhinoceros. Yes, rhinoceros once roamed the Philippines. They fished the South China Sea, gathered fruits, built tools by striking stones together, and carved shells into decorations. They had culture, they had purpose, and they had roots. So why don't we talk about them? Because history isn't written by the first people, it's written by the loudest ones. When the Spanish arrived, they didn't discover the Philippines, they interrupted it. And then for 400 years, they rewrote everything. Our gods became devils, our ancestors became uncivilized. Our own history was replaced with theirs. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't die, it just waits. Buried, like those bones in Tabon Cave, until someone's brave enough to dig it up. And that's where people like you, the modern Filippo, come in. Because the story of Tabon Man isn't just about the past. It's about identity. It's about remembering that you come from resilience, from people who survived ice ages, storms, invasions, and still kept their spirit alive. Imagine what that means for your life right now. The struggles you face, bills, jobs, uncertainty, they're nothing compared to what your ancestors overcame. You are the product of survivors, not just colonized survivors, original ones. Let's get one thing straight. The Philippines wasn't an accident of geography. It was a cradle of human endurance. Palawan, thousands of years ago, wasn't just beautiful. It was a lifeline. Back then, sea levels were so low that the Philippines was connected to Borneo. Humans didn't even need boats to reach it. They walked. They followed the animals. They adapted. This land, the same soil you walk on, has been home to humanity longer than most of the world even existed. And here's something that should make every Filipino's blood boil and beam with pride at the same time. Even after discovering one of the oldest human fossils in Asia, the story barely made it to your classroom. Why? Because for centuries, Filipino history was designed to make you look smaller, to make you believe you were civilized only when someone else arrived. But no, your ancestors were mastering fire when Europe was still crawling out of caves. They were making tools before civilization had a word for it. It's time to say it loud. The Filipino story didn't start in 1521. It started 47,000 years before Spain even existed. When Dr. Fox held that fossilized skull, he wasn't just holding bones, he was holding a forgotten legacy. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it whisper, "We were here first." But hold on, because the deeper we dig, the stranger it gets. What happened to them? Did they die out? Were they replaced? Or are their bloodlines still running through your veins right now? Stay with me, because in segment 2, we'll uncover how modern science uncovered a truth that'll make you rethink everything you know about who the real Filipinos are. Here's the part they never told you in school. When scientists discovered the Tabon skull, they didn't just find bones. They found a mirror, a reflection of where we came from and maybe who we still are. Because the truth is, those ancient humans, they didn't just vanish. Parts of them are still alive, in you. Let that sink in. For decades, experts argued, did the Tabon people die out? Were they replaced by later migrants from Taiwan, the so-called Austronesians? Or did they mix, adapt, evolve, and quietly pass their legacy through time? Well, thanks to modern DNA research, we now know they survived. When scientists studied the genomes of indigenous Filipinos, especially the Eta, Ata, and Ati, they found something mind-blowing, traces of ancient DNA that predate all known migrations. That means the Tabon people's blood didn't disappear. It's still running through the veins of these communities today. In other words, the oldest humans in the Philippines aren't gone. They're still here, walking, breathing, living reminders of a story 47,000 years old. But here's where it gets emotional. While other nations build museums around their first civilizations, we've ignored ours. The Eta, the Acta, the Dumagat, they are the living descendants of the first Filipinos, and yet they're the ones pushed to the mountains, displaced by development, and called minorities. The irony is brutal. The people who were here first are treated like they belong last. Did you ever notice that? In history books, they're always described as tribal, isolated, or backward. But let's reframe that. What if we said instead resilient, independent, and unbroken? Because that's what they are. They've survived wars, colonization, deforestation, and cultural erasure. And still, they carry the DNA of humanity's original wave in the island. Quick pause before we go deeper. If you're proud to know this truth, that your story didn't start with colonization but with courage, smash that like button right now. Comment irony bloodline below so we know you're part of this rediscovery. Let's see how many proud Filipinos are watching this moment in history together. One of the most powerful studies came from the University of Copenhagen in 2021. Scientists discovered that some Filipino indigenous groups share genetic markers with early human species that once lived in Asia, even distinct from Neanderthals. That's how ancient this bloodline is. And that means every Filipino, whether in Manila, Mindanao, or Madrid, carries a spark of something primordial. Think about that the next time someone tries to measure your worth by your accent or your passport. You come from a people who survived the Ice Age barefoot, and still managed to pass their genes, their tools, their spirit all the way to the 21st century. But then, here's the twist. Somewhere along the way, that pride got buried. Not under soil this time, but under systems. Colonialism didn't just take our land, it rewired our memory. It made us forget that our ancestors were engineers of survival, long before civilization had a word for it. The Tabon Caves weren't just shelters, they were laboratories of innovation. Fire, tools, community, ritual, everything that makes us human started there. And yet, when we talk about Filipino greatness, we jump straight to Jose Rizal or the Spanish galleons, as if nothing worth remembering existed before that. But imagine if we flipped the script. Imagine if we taught our children that the Filipino identity began not in a classroom or a church, but in a cave where the first sparks of fire dance on limestone walls. Imagine if we told them that they are descendants of the first storytellers, people who lived in rhythm with the sea, who honored their dead, who learned to adapt to nature instead of destroying it. That changes everything. Because the story of Tabon isn't just about anthropology, it's about reclaiming dignity. It's about reconnecting with the oldest truth of all, that you were never small, never weak, and never late to history. You were here before it began. And this isn't just philosophy, it's science. A 2023 genetic mapping project confirmed that Filipinos today are a mosaic, 90% Austronesian ancestry mixed with traces from ancient hominins that predate recorded history. Those fragments from Tabon, they live in your cells. They're why Filipinos have such extraordinary adaptability, thriving everywhere from the deserts of Dubai to the snows of Canada. The same survival instinct that kept Tabon Man alive through the Ice Age still pulses in every heartbeat today. You see, what we call Filipino resilience didn't start in modern times. It's biological memory. When typhoons hit, when economies collapse, when the world says you can't, something deep in your DNA whispers, we've been through worse. That's not poetic, that's evolution. And yet, we've been conditioned to see these traits as struggle instead of strength. We glorify Western explorers for discovery, but forget our own people discovered how to exist. No tools, no technology, just instinct, courage, and fire. The same fire we still carry. But let me tell you a story, a real one this time. In 2019, an Ayata elder named Lito was asked by a journalist, "Do you ever wish your people had modernized earlier?" He smiled and said, "We modernized first, you're just catching up." That line stuck with me because he was right. The Ayata have survived longer than most civilizations ever will. They understood balance, taking from the earth only what they needed, respecting the spirits of their ancestors, and moving with the rhythm of nature. That's not backward. That's wisdom that built empires. And if you really think about it, the very idea of being Filipino started with them, not with flags or politics or colonizers, but with communities like Tabon, who learned to live, not dominate, who saw nature as family, not property, who valued belonging over borders. So what does this mean for you, the viewer, the dreamer, the hustler trying to make it in 2025? It means your roots run deeper than the countries you migrate to. It means your worth isn't defined by paperwork or status, but by 47,000 years of inherited strength. And it means every time you feel like giving up, you're betraying a lineage that never did. Tell me in the comments, do you believe modern Filipinos still carry that ancient fire, or has the world made us forget it? I read every single comment, and your story might be featured in the next episode. You are the living proof that history didn't end, it evolved. So the next time someone asks where you're from, don't just say the Philippines. Say, I come from the oldest bloodline in Asia, from the caves of Tabon, from people who survived extinction and still learned how to sing. Because that's the truth the textbooks forgot to print, and the world needs to remember. And we're not done yet, because if the Tabon Caves revealed the first Filipinos, what they found next revealed something even bigger. Evidence of a civilization of gold, trade, and power that existed long before Spain, long before colonization, and long before history decided to start keeping score. Stay locked in, because in segment 3, we uncover how these forgotten ancestors became the builders of an empire the world refused to acknowledge. Here's the part where everything you thought you knew about Philippine history starts to crumble and rebuild itself into something far grander. Because after the discovery of Tabon Man, archaeologists didn't stop digging. What they uncovered next wasn't just bones. It was proof of something powerful, a forgotten civilization, a thriving world that existed long before colonizers gave it a name. See, history likes to paint the Philippines as a passive player, a group of islands waiting for discovery. But thousands of years before the Spanish even learned how to sail that far, the Philippines was already buzzing with life, trade, and artistry. The proof? The gold. In the very same Palawan region, in the caves where the Tabon skull was found, archaeologists later discovered burial jars, ornaments, and intricate tools. These weren't crude trinkets, they were crafted with intention and meaning. Some of the burial jars, dating back 3,000 years, show that the ancient Filipinos practiced spiritual rituals and believed in life after death. Think about that. Our ancestors weren't uncivilized. They had belief systems, craftsmanship, and respect for the dead long before Christianity even existed. But then came one of the greatest archaeological revelations in Southeast Asia, the Surigao treasure. Thousands of gold artifacts, crowns, necklaces, belts, and jewelry all buried deep beneath Mindanao's soil. It was 1981, and a bulldozer operator named Heriberto Morales accidentally unearthed what would become one of Asia's most spectacular ancient finds. Proof that the Philippines wasn't a blank canvas waiting for European culture. We were goldsmiths, traders, and leaders of our own world. Archaeologists dated the treasure to roughly the 10th to 13th centuries, long before Spanish contact. The artistry rivaled China's and India's. That's how connected the archipelago was, part of a vast trade network that stretched from India to Borneo to Japan. These weren't isolated islands, they were part of a maritime empire. So let's get one thing straight. The pre-colonial Philippines wasn't primitive. It was powerful. There were kingdoms with structure, order, and commerce. The kingdom of Butuan, for example, sent trade missions to China as early as 1001 AD, over 500 years before Magellan's arrival. The Laguna copperplate inscription, the oldest written document found in the Philippines, dates back to 900 AD. That means Filipinos had a written language when much of Europe was still crawling through its dark ages. And yet most of us were taught none of this. We were told that Spain civilized us. Oh, they interrupted us. The irony is that the Spanish didn't discover a nation in need of culture. They conquered one that already had it. The gold they took, the scripts they banned, the beliefs they called pagan, those weren't relics of savagery. They were the signs of a people who understood art, trade, and diplomacy long before they were colonized. Here's the punch. Our ancestors didn't just survive, they thrived. They had systems, alliances, and governance. They traded with China, India, and Arabia. They had class hierarchies, social laws, and intricate jewelry that symbolized power and identity. They even buried their dead with wealth, not as vanity, but as respect. They believed that prosperity should follow you into the next life. That's not barbaric. That's human brilliance at its peak. And here's where the full circle forms. The tavern people, the original Filipinos, planted the seed. The later Austronesians, goldsmiths, and traders were the branches. Together, they built something lasting. A civilization shaped by continuity, adaptation, and memory. If this revelation gives you goosebumps, if it makes you rethink everything you were taught about being Filipino, stop scrolling for a second. Hit the like button right now, because the world deserves to see this truth resurface. Comment ancient power if you believe our real story deserves to be shouted from the rooftops. Now here's where it gets personal again. Imagine being told your entire life that your people were simple, waiting for someone else to show you the light. Then finding out your ancestors were wearing gold, writing scripts, and negotiating trade routes across Asia while other nations were still learning to build boats. That's not just shocking, that's empowering. It means we weren't behind history, we were history. It means we weren't discovered, we were remembered too late. The gold, the jars, the inscriptions, they all scream one message. You are more advanced than you've been told. And that's not just pride, it's responsibility. Because once you know this truth, you can't go back to calling yourself small. The same blood that built the Tabon caves also built the trade ships of Butuan, the gold crowns of Surigao, and the scripts etched on copper plates. And if you're listening to this today, that means the line was never broken. The ancient bloodline of builders, creators, and warriors still lives in you. But let's not romanticize, let's realize the tragedy is not that the Spaniards came. The tragedy is that we forgot who we were before they did. For centuries, the system convinced Filipinos to look west for validation instead of looking within for identity. But when you trace it back, from modern DNA to ancient bones to gold buried in soil, it becomes undeniable. The Philippines was never a footnote, it was a foundation. And what's wild is how this rediscovery changes everything about how we see ourselves now. Because if we could build empires out of stone and sea, what's stopping us from rebuilding one today? If our ancestors could trade across oceans without Google Maps, what's stopping us from connecting the world digitally, culturally, economically, through our own brilliance? Maybe we've been underestimating ourselves for far too long. Drop a comment right now. What part of this forgotten story shocked you most? The gold, the trade, the writing, or the fact that no one ever told you? Because your voice matters in this new era of rediscovery. The more we talk about it, the more we reclaim it. And as we close this episode, remember this: when they found that skull in Palawan, they didn't just dig up a fossil, they uncovered your reflection. You are the descendant of the world's earliest survivors, innovators, and visionaries. You are proof that Filipino greatness didn't begin with colonization, it began with creation. So the next time you hear someone say, "We have no history before Spain," look them in the eye and say, "That's because you stopped digging." Because the truth? The real Filipinos, the one of caves, gold, and gods, has been waiting 47,000 years for you to remember it. Now, if this episode moved you, share it. Let's rewrite our story together, one viewer at a time. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell the world we were never discovered, we were simply forgotten.